Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Building a Culture of Excellence, Understanding the Quality Maturity Rubric with Greg Sypolt, VP of Quality Assurance at EverFi. Before Greg kicks off, I'll give a short intro. So Greg has spent the majority of his career in quality assurance with an engineering mindset, gaining experience in areas such as tool development, automated testing, and DevOps. Prior to his position at EverFi, in the last 5 years, he served as Director of Quality Engineering at Gannett USA Today, successfully transitioning it from a traditional manual testing strategy by coaching multiple development teams to build quality into every stage of the continuous integration pipeline. Outside of his role as VP of Quality Assurance at EverFi, Greg is passionate about do-it-yourself projects around the house and recently single-handedly finished his basement himself. Good on you, Greg. If you're looking for someone to talk to about quality excellence, reach out to Greg on Twitter or LinkedIn to geek out about testing, technology, or do-it-yourself projects. So without any further ado, Greg, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dee. Thanks for everybody joining today. So I'm going to kind of be talking about how you build this culture of quality excellence. And when I kind of started putting these slides together around 6 months ago, it was really about focusing my transition away from my previous job and how I start building quality excellence at EverFi, where I bought in. And it really made me try to think about understanding that quality maturity rubric. And we'll kind of talk about what I achieved at my previous company and what I'm trying to achieve currently right now at EverFi. So a little bit, hello everyone, a little bit about me. I've been writing blogs probably the last 5 years, trying to share my knowledge, experiences. I like to tinker with new things, try it out. I've been speaking at conferences, webinars, and stuff like this to kind of continue to be that quality advocate for everybody. I'm constantly trying to figure out new ways to improve testing, to be more efficient and things like that, and share those experiences. Like I say, I'm a sports fan. I finished my basement as what's behind me with my 2 physical hands and learned a lot of things along the way. I'm a husband and a father of 3, but if you want to kind of geek out about testing or technology or whatever, you got questions, you can hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, and you can also go out to my GitHub page where I pretty much put a lot of my content from, blogs and, like sessions like this where I share it with you so you can kind of get some other insights. So kind of what we're going to talk about is your path of what you need to focus on, why you're here today. You're here today because maybe you're trying to find a way to how to build this quality excellence at your current company, or maybe you're already in this journey, but you feel like you're just not making any headway. I'm going to share some of my experiences of how to maybe accomplish that. And part of this is, setting that journey. And this is kind of our agenda through this whole thing today. And hopefully you take something away from, our conversation here. So kind of starting with the vision around, building quality excellence, I think really quality is really a journey. It's not a destination. You're going to continue to evolve like everything we do from a technology standpoint. Things evolve every day, and quality is exactly the same way. You'll find new methods, you'll find new ways of doing things, or new tools, or you're building new tools. But I think one of the key factors around this whole thing is building a culture to where everyone in the organization really owns quality. It's just not QA, it's just not developers, it's everybody at the company. And if you can build that vision to where everybody has some type of accountability or feels ownership of this, you're on the right path forward of building a really quality into your applications. And it allows everybody to really have that focus of being, the voice of quality. But in this vision, you need to focus on about improving the speed of testing. I've always been a believer around quality doesn't have to be kind of the bottleneck. Try to speed it up, be very efficient, reliable. And to do that, you have to collaborate with your engineering department, your DevOps team, to really build this robust kind of like development life cycle. And I've been practicing this vision for several years, and I continue to evolve it as I go along. But I think it's really important to make sure the key of your vision is really everybody owns quality. It doesn't have to be silos, and you need to break down those silos to have those conversations. And maybe this whole pandemic has allowed us to collaborate a little bit better, right? We're being forced to get on the conversations based on Zoom or Hangouts and stuff like that. And I think it's going to allow us to be a better team, to build this better rapport. So kind of starting out and thinking about the things that you need to achieve along this quality journey and those objectives. I think it's really important for everybody to really understand how we really like make and test things. This starts from the intake of a new feature to the actual discovery of that feature, also of saying, okay, how are we going to build this, but how are we going to test it? How are we going to deploy it? We're working as a team together. And while we're doing that whole process and we understand, okay, this is how our quality strategy is going to play out. I always kind of approach things from a quality playbook. You have a quality playbook with a bunch of different types of tests, but you don't have to pick that exact same play for every game plan, right? It's like any type of sporting event. You have to determine what you're actually trying to build and how you're actually going to test it to where everybody kind of agrees to that. What this allows you to do when everybody understands how you're doing all this is you're building a quality mindset up front. That's the first thing people are kind of thinking about, building that mindset at the very beginning of that intake, when you go from the intake to basically the discover to you're actually executing it, but it also continues that mindset at the release state of it. And so when we release it, you're learning from the data coming in. Did our strategy work? Where do we need to fine tune it along this way? And we continue to iterate with that. It's just like quality is the same as like any type of process. You got to continue to iterate on it. You continue to evolve as long as you go along this journey. And as long as you're going along this journey, you need to kind of understand your current testing, coverage. Are you hitting everything? Are you hitting the most critical things? The way I always look at it is kind of go at that, 30,000 foot view and say, okay, is all the most critical things in our application covered? Okay, yes, they are. Now let's start chipping away at more lower levels as you go, but focus first on the most critical things in your application. If this goes down, would this, affect users, or will it actually cause a major outage and stuff? If it's just something minor, then like, okay, we'll get to that. But make sure you kind of understand how you're covering it today, making sure how you're going to cover it in the future. And this whole objective is around reducing manual testing. We all know that manual testing, it's really hard for us to really keep up with development these days with continuous integration and stuff. And our goal is to really reduce manual testing in a certain sense, to where we can advocate automating all the right things. And that's kind of going back to that coverage piece. If we're automating all the right things, that means we're shifting more left to where we're testing things really early, finding issues before we push it through all our different environments. And I think that's really important from that standpoint. But also when you're automating all the right things, you're able to move really fast. And kind of a relay off those right things is understanding the balance of your testing portfolio. Making sure you're not laser focused on just UI testing, but making sure you're spreading that wealth across unit tests, API, integration, performance tests. You really need to understand what your testing portfolio will look like, and that's kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier around your game plan. Your game plan is just balancing of the testing portfolio, but you have a playbook of how you're going to pick and choose from that. And as you know, if you're shifting left, you're basically embracing quality at every stage. You have different trigger points and stuff. You're having developers when they finish their code, you're having automated tests being developed or implemented exactly in parallel. You're able to get feedback really quickly at the PR level. And I think that's the key, is if a developer finishes something and they fire off tests, you're getting instant feedback. And there's a cost savings of that, rather than, you're kind of waiting for something to get into staging or something into production and letting the customer find that. We're trying to find this much earlier in the whole process. More exploratory testing, full automated testing. You're also trying to make sure you're building this mindset of building velocity into for developers, but you're building velocity into your actual sprints itself. A lot of organizations, in the sense of from a development standpoint, is just laser focused on development tasks, but we also need to think about the quality velocity that goes into every sprint. Quality, visibility, and accountability, trying to expose all these things from testing to bugs and things like that, and holding more accountability will build a better quality mindset across this whole journey you're trying to take. And like I say, you need to remove the silo mentality. We should be working as a team. We should be kind of being focused on everybody owns this. And I think your success in your quality journey is really breaking down these silos and actually blending things together. Blurring the lines will set you up. But like at the end of the day, it's not really a destination. It's always going to continue to evolve. So that kind of give you a concept of what we're trying, understand here. But I wanted to kind of start at the end of the journey, and this is the end of the journey when I left my previous company, and there was a lot of things that goes off. I didn't singly hand accomplish this. This was my whole entire team believing into this vision, objectives I placed out there. We was able to accomplish a lot of great things in my 5 years, which I'm now taking those exact same things over to EverFi, and we're trying to establish these exact same type of ground rules. So by the numbers, think about like 5 years ago when I started my previous company, it was 100% manual testing. It took us weeks to release. I know that there's various companies that are still struggling to get over the hump with this, but to kind of think about like we were doing 4,000 plus builds per week, and these numbers may have changed and probably increased a little bit since I've left, but kind of taking numbers from test generation where we evolved from writing a single script to actually generating scripts based off a single kind of configuration file, running through a test engine and stuff like that. It allowed us to kind of have a more proficient way of writing tests. If you've been writing automated tests, it's the same thing. You're kind of copy and pasting a lot of things. It's a boilerplate type of thing, some variants and stuff. But this allowed us to generate tests at various levels, from visual using Applet tools to also with Selenium, where we was creating all of these like model-based type of scenarios where we was covering the system really in depth. And these are just some numbers where we was averaging like around 5 million tests per month across multiple teams with a very high pass rate of 99.2%. And that pass rate to look at is when you're doing automation, you need to find a known state. You have to, how do you get your environment into a known state to where things are not changing all the time to make your test very brittle? If you all know, if you're doing a lot of UI testing, it can be very brittle. You got to get to a known state of seeding the database, using APIs to set up data, tear down data. There's other ways of mocking things out, but that allows you to get to that really high success rate to where you build confidence into your actual automation. And kind of think the other thing, the speed of authoring to the execution time. I never want to be the, kind of the bottleneck of like QAs. We're waiting on QA to get through this. Try to set some true SLAs, your civil level agreements. Hey, less than 5 minutes, I can get through all these tests. Don't be the bottleneck in that. And so how did we accomplish all this by the numbers? Well, let me walk through this, and I kind of document this as I was going into EverFi. Is like, how can I duplicate this exact same thing at EverFi? There's going to be some variant differences and stuff, but I know we'll get there. And every application is a little different, and I feel like we're on the right path forward. So let's talk about the 3 pillars, and I think this is where really the quality excellence really starts out with, and really establishing these 3 pillars. Quality over quantity. I think if you have, I'll go into more detail of each one of these pillars here in a second, but quality over quantity is really important. Work smarter, not harder, and set the right expectations. So quality over quantity, like really testing the right things, not everything. Yeah, I mean, maybe if you've already tested all the right things, right, you could expand on that, but every little bit of code you add for automated testing could be possibly maintenance or things you got to maintain. So you have to be, there's a fine balance between that, because you have new things coming in the door all the time, and you have to maintain that and balance that all out. But all the members of the team need to kind of learn how to think of like the user perspective. The user perspective is like, how do I understand how many users are using this application? We're making a lot of assumptions when we're creating these tests, in the sense of this is the path that the user is going to take every time. Use analytics to really drive how you're going to target writing your tests. kind of take that perspective, because if you can take the user perspective and then create that as an actual testing coverage, you're going to have a real robust quality application if you can understand how they're using it, and using data like Google Analytics or New Relic or various other things, however you're trying to track your users. Building a strategy around that is going to be better than trying to just create as many tests as possible. But, like I say, integrate these transparency strategies, greater responsibility and accountability. If you're holding more accountability of, like, if a developer makes a change, you're able to fire or trigger off some various tests, hold them accountable around that. If they push something into a staging environment and it broke, you got to hold them accountable, saying, why didn't we have coverage? Why didn't you run these tests? The next one is around working smarter, not harder. Having a dedicated developer solutions team at my previous company was really key to our success. Having laser focused development around creating self-service solutions for testing, or just building testing solutions to continue to evolve, right? If you're writing a various automated script, how can I make this faster? How can I speed up the authoring of this? How can I make it more efficient and reliable, right? The speed of authoring the various things that I'm a true believer is test generation. Like, a lot of the stuff we're doing every day is boilerplate type of stuff, right? We're copying and pasting one file over to the next, and then just changing some navigation or some data inputs and stuff like that. I can make it more efficient by kind of creating that, template, and then run it through some type of engine to where we're being more robust and it's easier to maintain. I think the other thing is take those data insights, as I was referring to before, right? Have all these data insights into a central location to where everybody can visualize how you're actually, performing. What's the health check of this application? How can I take these data insights and make them actionable from a development standpoint, or how our users are using it, or even drive how we target our testing? But we also got to continue to make testing better and easier for everyone. Make it to where it's so easy that anybody, even non-technical people, could actually understand it, but maybe possibly even contribute to the actual automation. And lastly, is really setting those expectations, really up front, and really, I think, is with the development team, because you're making a lot of changes, and I think the development teams really need to understand their responsibility around quality and the performance at the end of the product, right? So they need to understand what their responsibilities are, and we need to communicate that and be very transparent during this transition, because if you're making this transition to where you're breaking down that silo approach and saying, hey, developers, you need some type of velocity into writing automation, even if it's 25%, you need to set those expectations up front so it's not confusing for them. But you need to understand that SLA between your developers and your QA team, or even your DevOps team, and making sure we communicate that and have a clear plan so there's no confusion as you're going along this journey. When I stepped back and I kind of stepped away from my previous job, and how do I measure the quality maturity of my current team, but also helping others understand where they sit in this maturity rubric, I've built all this knowledge in my head for various years, and I tried to kind of figure out a way to where you could build this quality excellence and actually have some gauge to understand where you're at today. So what I'm going to kind of cover here is how you could kind of take this rubric after the session, go out and see where you measure. And this is just my opinion. I'm totally open of adding more things to it or tweaking some of the language and stuff, but it allowed me to kind of look where I was previously and look at where I'm going in the future, and try to measure how I can improve it and have those conversations and with particular teams, or within my team, or whatever attribute I have on this rubric. So let's dig a little deeper to it. So we measure this, rubric. It's really around people, technology, and processes. These are the three areas of focus around your maturity rubric. And I'm going to kind of go in through to where you need to have the right people in place. If you don't have the right people in place, how do you train them up to do some of the things you're trying to transition to, right? Do I have the right technologies, from not even just from testing frameworks, but do I have a CI/CD pipeline that actually can handle the things I want to do, right? What is my end goal? Am I just focused on, triggering things on a PR level, or am I fine just running nightly regressions, at once a day, right? You have to understand, do I have the technology to do all that? But then the processes is probably the other piece is the process clear of how I can actually achieve an automation world. So I'm going to kind of cherry pick some of the attributes I've kind of created and how I actually focus on this, and this kind of grading rubric around your quality, maturity, and culture is one I'm going to start with. There's 4 levels that we're going to kind of focus on: beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert. And maybe when you look at this and you're saying, okay, well, I am a beginner, so I am at this level. I don't share any quality ownership. I silo between development and QA. You're losing insight on the larger quality picture. I'm here. Well, how do I move up to that next level, right? It's going to take time. It's a journey to get to that advanced level. But you can look at that next level and you can start kind of coming up with some actions or some plans to try to start moving the culture to that next level. And that's really kind of having conversations like this to where you're sharing those experiences, how to get people more involved. How do I want my dev team to be more involved? And so you can start changing the culture and shifting it over so I can get to where the team are actually finding problems together. That's what we all want to do, because when you're finding things together as a team, it means you're finding things earlier when that shift left mentality. Another one's your environment. Maybe your advanced environment, you're automatically creating builds and staging, pushing it, and you're just pushing, you're basically doing a push button deployment production. And maybe that's as far as you want to go. You're exercising, but maybe you're on the far left of these environments, so where you're very manual, it's automatable somewhat from builds and manual staging and that. This is where you have an opportunity as a conversational piece to how do I get to that next level intermediate? And I can have that conversation with the DevOps team. These are just ways to kind of think about where you're at in this, kind of whole grading rubric. Another one's quality practices. Here, maybe I'm laser focused, I'm running unit tests, I got test suites that are reliable, but manual integration and regression testing, right? How do I start shifting a little bit more to the right on this? Making sure maybe I'm hitting percentage. I'm not a big advocate around percentages on unit tests because a percentage is just a number, but maybe I'm looking at how I can automate more things in this whole process and look at particular tests, right? Our goal is to be kind of fully automated, automating all the right things. So this is a way to kind of grade that one. And that one is around automated testing. Here, depending on manual testing, early automation, you're just getting started. But full automation means you have a well balanced, but expert level is around test generation. You continue to evolve and move that bar. So all that said, I'm sorry if this is a little small, I have a lot of attributes how I actually went into this whole process around from the beginner to an expert level and measuring things out there the way I look at, right? And if you look at the very bottom, I'll expose this rubric to everybody. You have access to it, but it's from culture, your roles, your communication, thinking about how your CD/CI pipelines operating to performance. There's a lot of attributes, and there could be even more. But maybe you take this rubric, sit down, and say, what are the attributes I would like to add to this, and try to add some context between the beginner to expert level. What it does is now you're setting this SLA of what I want to achieve in my quality maturity rubric. And those 3 steps is around the grading rubric as I reference. I'll give everybody, maybe I can try to copy this really quick, and maybe I can have a DD kind of paste this out to everybody. This rubric here is just a Google spreadsheet. If you don't have access, I think it's opened up to everybody, but take a chance, look it over. You may want to add some more things to it. But after you figured out where you grade yourself, now step number 2 is about focusing on that improvement plan. How am I going to move one of these attributes from a level 1 to a 2, right? And only focus on that. You can't do it all at once. It's a journey, remember. Focus on one of the things that are really important. And for me, it's about culture. You have to build the right culture to do quality excellence. And if you can move your culture from a 1 to a 3, you're going to achieve a lot of great things. And once you get that roadmap put in place, your implementation side of it. I'm in the implementation stage of this at EverFi and various attributes. I'm probably working on, the culture I've kind of got into probably that 2 to 3 range already. Where we started as a 1 and now we're already up to that 3, which is great. In a few months I've been there. But you got to continue to think about how you're going to implement it. Do I have the right people to implement a lot of these? So this is just a great way to kind of like grade where you're at in your journey. It's a great tool to maybe possibly improve your roadmap and continue to evolve. So quality roles, and to accomplish all of this, you may want to kind of think about the roles you need to achieve this, right? Kind of stealing this from some of the things I accomplished over my years and how I like to continue to evolve. But there's like 5 areas you can think about a quality role. One's a QA specialist. They focus on manual exploratory testing. And then you have this kind of automator. They're the automation engineer. A lot of you probably experience this where you live and die this every day in the sense of, I just write automated scripts. It might be Selenium, it might be Cypress, maybe it's just API tests. I think the next, when you're making this journey to quality excellence, is you kind of need to move into this industry SDET level to where you're doing 1, 2, but plus they could do development work. They could be embedded into the team, but they understand algorithms, they understand the code, they could contribute to it. That allows this individual to really be the voice of quality and how we can build quality into those applications in various ways. Number 4 is where I like to see EverFi achieve, in the next year or 2 years, to evolve the team to where we're this kind of like what I at one point was called the Gannett SDET, but now it's the EverFi is you also can do all the things below, but you also can focus on DevOps. You can start maintaining some of those solutions. This is the part of that developer solutions team where they can do development work, they can do QA work, they can do even DevOps and all the things below to where we can achieve great things. But I think number 5 is like my ultimate goal someday of like, hey, we've got all the right tooling in place. We can focus on security, data science, and machine learning, and learn how users are using our application, use that data and target the right things, regardless of what role you are here. But this gives you another rubric of saying, where am I at in my organization? How's my QA team actually staffed? How do I train them up to get them from a 2 to a 3, right? I think it's really important to focus on your team because they're the ones who are going to be achieving all these great things in your vision. And like any sport, you need a team, you got to work together. And how do I take people from a 2 to 3? You got to put the right things out there. You have to have the right mindset. Professional growth attributes, understand everybody's going to have different attributes. What's the strength of certain individuals, and make sure that you have someone that can mentor and level people up. I think that's really the key, is continue to try to push and challenge individuals. I'm always a believer, if you don't feel uncomfortable in a situation, you're not really challenging yourself enough to be better. And I think to achieve a lot of these things in a quality mindset and from that clarity of it is you have to continue to push yourself to be great. So all that said, we've talked about how we create a rubric, how we grade our system, how we get the right people in place, building that roadmap and trying to implement all this. I think at the end of the day is this quality platform that we're trying to achieve. If you're doing everything above, you're starting to start thinking about, this platform is really various components that allows us to be self-efficient, but also spread the wealth across the development team, from insights, talking about code, how we implement technologies, and continue to tinker with various things. But we need to understand the purpose really behind this quality platform. We're trying to build a culture that embraces quality at every stage, right? Remember I talked about this before: intake, discovery, execute, and then release. This platform basically embraces a lot of that, but it's also an enabler and it drives continuous improvement and adopting quality practices, but it also allows you to adopt new solutions by kind of thinking outside the box. Think about what you're doing today. Is there a solution out there that could actually make it a little bit better, more efficient? The platform allows you to do these type of things. It gives that team to lead a sense of purpose, openness, and trust. And as soon as you build a platform like this and people believe in it, you have to believe and be bought into it. I think then everybody starts to trust the process, and you'll see great success out of that. So what is inside this platform? Data insights, from having a developer solutions team, finding kind of these turnkey solutions where it's easy to enable solutions on new projects, right? I have a new project. How fast can I get my existing Selenium or Cypress up and running, right? Do I have the right quality playbook in place where I can start implementing these? From my previous job, this became really easy to where we could spin things up in like a month or so or less by just embedding some of these things into it. Right now at EverFi, I'm building all these things to where we're making it a lot easier, and adding like Apple tools into our new platform now at EverFi is allowing us to, one, take more visual, creating more of a visual regression around our courses, our platform. It's speeding up our automation because we can easily create tests around that, and we're now thinking about how do I create an environment to where it has a known state, and it makes those visual tests even more reliable. Ambassadors, we're quality advocates. We got to continue to have that voice of quality. I think it's not just one person, but if you get a developer that actually truly buys in and believes in this, they become an ambassador or an advocate. And that just kind of like spreads like wildfire, in a sense of like, if you get one person, you'll get the next person, you'll get the third person to start believing in your vision, but also in the platform, and you're going to achieve a lot of great things from that. Kind of focus on the functional, non-functional stuff too. I think that's really important from that. Think about what's the difference between a functional type of test that would make those things really better and faster, but are those non-functional things for monitoring and find those critical paths that you didn't quite think about, that's going to also really improve your journey going forward. So, reaping those savings, I think it's really important. There's a lot of stuff on this slide. Looking at, if you're doing all these great things I've kind of talked about so far, you're going to start seeing the cost of data insights, where it's a really small lift to really wire up these type of things into a new project. You're getting those insights from people. Everyone has instant access to these data insights. They can understand the quality data that's coming into it to make better decisions. Developer solutions, you're able to spin up new solutions really fast because you've learned from your lessons in the past, but also you may already have something to where it's easy to implement into it. Savings in your functional testing. You're running tests, you're saving 80% of this just by running tests at the PR level rather than waiting to get the staging, right? And you're finding things much sooner. Another one, 60-minute brown bag for like a vendor solution like Apple Tools. They could leave that 60-minute session and they're up and running and start writing tests using visual tests, or maybe it's Cypress. We've built a skeleton or something around that to where you're saying, okay, I got this skeleton, now I can get it implemented. That's the goal, is when you come out of a session on some of these turnkey solutions. So to kind of wrap up things, back where we started, questions like, how do I go from that manual, 100% manual, right? Well, it's obvious what I've just talked about. Like, you start thinking about your actual journey and what you're trying to accomplish, grade yourself, right? Because your goal is to kind of do 4,000, 5,000 builds per week. You want to maybe do generation of like 600, maybe you want to get to 800. These are the things that we really reflected on, and based on my success at my previous company, these are the things I'm instilling today at EverFi too, to where I can accomplish these exact same things from before and after using a quality platform that builds quality excellence. And it really starts building that kind of understanding your quality maturity rubric. So I want to say thank you for everybody's time. I know I go really fast. I'm always a very fast talker and everything. I try to limit myself to only a liter of coffee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Such a wonderful talk. I want to say to everyone, I see your thank you notes to Greg, and I promise that I will email all of them to him after the session. But just so you know, people are talking about how useful and beneficial this is. So thank you so much. And we'll go into questions. I'll just mention I'm getting some questions about this again. So yes, we are recording the session, and yes, you will get the recording emailed to you by end of day Monday. And hopefully Greg will be kind enough and also share his slides with me, so I'll be able to share them with you alongside the recording. So yeah. So with that said, now we'll go into some Q&A. So first question, with shift left and shared ownership of testing, where is the boundary between developers and QA, and how do you set those expectations, ownership, and responsibilities?
That's a good question. I really would want the boundary. I guess the boundary is really setting the expectations of what that boundary would be. Shifting left, right? You know, how much would development own in the velocity of developing automated tests, right? Maybe your focus is understanding your quality playbook in the sense of like, okay, I got unit tests, I have API tests, and maybe I have some other various things in there. Your boundary is to make sure it's very clear of who owns what, because at the beginning you might have an automator, you know, an automation engineer where they don't have that deep knowledge of everything. So your boundary is going to be based on the deep knowledge of the development of that platform, and then also your QA person understanding how they build their knowledge up so they can start help contributing to that. And that's why I think it's really key to try to get to more of that industry type of SDET where they can share the responsibility of development work, but actually understand how it's actually developed, where they can actually create that, really break down that boundary to where it's more of a blurred line going forward. That's how I kind of focus on the shift left and having those conversations early on the intake and discovery.
So we got two questions, not similar, but let's say consecutive questions about your quality over quantity in the pillar slide. So the first question was, how do you know what is the right thing to test? How do you determine that?
The right thing to test really is understanding the critical paths of your application. You know, if your application is focused on, you know, creating particular things, right, X, Y, and Z, right, and if you can't create X, Y, and Z, then you're failed in the sense of creating the right things around that to guard against that. I think the other thing is around that is understanding how your users actually are using the application. So taking any type of analytics to understand, you know, what paths they're actually taking or how they're actually interacting with your application or your product, allows you to start kind of forming or implementing a strategy around automating the right things and how it actually automate that. It doesn't have to be through the UI. Is it an API call, right? Maybe it's a performance test. Maybe we're seeing a lot of traffic hitting in a particular area, making sure that we have performance testing when they hit a particular page or something in your application. It's a fine balance of trying to figure out what the right things are, but it's having that conversation with the team, making sure if you have a, you know, kind of a, you know, maybe a data science team, understanding how you can pull some of those insights to build better strategies around that. But I would also kind of like talk about, maybe ask the question as like, what would break an application that would be a showstopper, right? You know, if it's a showstopper, then maybe I need to make sure that I have coverage around those showstoppers, right? And that's a good way to kind of start at the critical stage. And then after you get those covered, then you can kind of start working your way down on some of the other layers.
So the follow-up question to that was, someone asked, Greg, you mentioned automating the right things, but also full automation. Aren't those two in conflict with each other?
Full automation is about having a balancing portfolio to me. You know, don't do everything at the UI level. What if I'm doing something to UI, could I actually remove some of the UI testing to an API test and only have the right balance of UI tests? So say if I'm creating, I'm going to give an example of like I'm creating an event, right? If I create an event, do I need to go through every possible combination at the UI level? No. How can I do that at the API level, right? And then maybe there's things in there from special characters or other limitations. I can put that in the unit test. It's about full automation is about that balanced portfolio and balancing it across different layers, because everybody knows if you can get away from UI testing as much as possible, it's going to be faster, more reliable. Try to eliminate what you're doing as much as possible at the UI level, because it's a little bit more expensive. It can be a little bit more brittle. That's what my mindset of full automation. Full automation also is just not focused on writing those type of tests. It starts at your infrastructure. Do you have the whole core of your whole application to run is your infrastructure? If you don't have testing at your infrastructure and you spin up a container, or you're running something in Kubernetes, for example, and it can't auto scale or something like that, your application is worthless, right? So full automation is from your infrastructure all the way to actually possibly production. Is it from my terminology of it?
So another question around the pillars slides. You talked about user perspective. So in this org-wide quality is a journey culture, how are the business teams involved, or are they? Do sales and marketing, do they give you user stories to test?
That's a great question. Yeah, I would say from my experience trying to get business analysts, understanding if you have professional service teams out there or even account managers and stuff, understanding insights from your customers is going to help you a lot. Build those relationships with these individuals. At EverFi, I got a close relationship now with the business analyst, even some of the professional service. My goal right now is to build that relationship, to understand what our customers are experiencing and how we can guard against that as best as possible, because that is automating some of the right things, because we're just kind of throwing something out in the dark of what we think is the right way of covering something, and we might totally miss it. So building that relationship with business analysts, professional services, to account managers, if you're kind of a SaaS product and stuff like that, is really critical in your path of building a really robust quality suite.
What is, in your experience, an optimal rate of test writing versus maintaining in the means of time spent?
A percentage between writing and maintaining. Oh gosh. I'll say my first experience ever going into the automation world, I think we had 15,000 Selenium scripts and 20% of them failed every night. That was very painful. We had a dedicated maintenance team. I learned a lot of things not to do. And you learn to try to make your code as reusable as possible. Will help maintain things. Trying to understand known states is another way to try to reduce the maintenance or maintaining your automation. I think known states is probably one of the biggest. I wouldn't say it's the linchpin of everything, but it's definitely having a known state for your automation is really key to your success, regardless of the layer of test. Being able to seed a database or be able to create preconditional data for your test from an API or mocking it out is going to stabilize it a lot. Try to isolate things as much as possible. Is going to improve your pass rate. It's going to also improve in the sense that you don't have much maintenance, but that maintenance can also come from just the churn of developers not owning quality from a standpoint, realizing if they make a change to an API endpoint or the schema or something, could possibly break our automated test from a UI standpoint, even our API test, but also possibly break the front end itself completely, right? Understanding that they need to look at all those things to be on the same page. Percentage-wise, if you're trying to approach it, gosh, that's so hard. I feel like it's an arbitrary number. I could see always 10% maintenance. At least I could see up to 25% maintenance sometimes, because things change, environments change. But I think over time, what allowed us to get to that 99.2% at Gannett was creating a known state, trying to innovate with tests, with test generation, where it's using a template and everybody's following a really strict, coding practice and standards you have to write it this way. It's the only way it's going to get to it, right? If you go to a page, you have to make sure that the expected state is there before you start doing things. I think those are some of the practices. Is kind of trying to evolve how you actually implement your test, and how you can try to maintain it. I can never put a percentage on it. That's a really hard one. I mean, even developers, it's hard. It's like trying to ask a developer, how do you predict, your velocity of bugs coming in? It's, you're always going to get these edge cases regardless how much you guard against it. It's hard to answer, but I'll give you the best answer to how I've accomplished some of that over the period of time.
Okay, so we have a question that I like, actually. How do you convince higher ups to purchase new software, new tools, new technologies? Any tips? Like, what are you looking for when your team members are asking you for budget? What are you asking them to show you?
I think one of the first advice I would have is quality is not free. Even if you have open source, regardless, quality comes at a cost. If you want to run faster, it comes at a cost. If you want to write more automated tests, it comes at a cost, right? And so, if I'm looking out, there's various degrees of what you're trying to add here. And I think trying to forecast like your budget around quality. What would your quality budget be from a developer on your QA team to vendors and stuff, right? So I think you kind of have to lay that out of what I need to accomplish. Taking things like Applitools is like, hey, I need a budget for X amount of dollars for Applitools, and this is what we'll gain from it. It builds a great visual regression and library for all the pages or all the modals or various things in our application. We know how they respond to things. So trying to show them that return on investment is really key. Also show some of the advantages of like some of the things that like Applitools would provide would be a great thing from some of the data points. Everything comes with a sticker price. If I ask for another developer, it's increase of budget. And so I would try to forecast that, like start thinking about 2021 already, right? We're 6 months away. You should be thinking about 2021, and you need to think about, okay, what's that cost? Because if you can get it up front and get that into the budget now, it's not saying that I even accomplish getting that service, but I build it into the budget. I think that's a really important thing. I think the other piece where it helps to sell it is proof of concepts. Get out there, tinker, show some data of how fast it gets things up and running. Like anything you build, regardless if it's vendor in-house, you're going to have to show the cost behind it and return investment with that service. Yeah, that's not an easy one because everybody's probably only even on a tighter budget these days with this whole pandemic and everything. And so you have to kind of figure out the balance there. And I'm more than willing to kind of, you can send me questions and I can try to go in more depth with that. That's always a hard one. But that's how I approach it.
So staying on the management theme here, any ideas or approaches on how to convince stakeholders in the organization to transition to the new philosophy, to get people on board, or did you find it hard or difficult? Any tips?
I think one is you have to build that trust. Experience is always key. I think I've had great success. I've had people, my managers and upper level management totally trust me. I think that's, with Everfi, they've trusted my experience and seeing things like what I'm doing out here today and then presenting things that I have accomplished and what I know I'm going to accomplish at Everfi has helped me build that buy-in. But if you haven't had that type of experience, sharing that experience with them, saying, hey, look at this individual, look what they have done, and if you back me up and we get the right people in place, we can definitely accomplish that. It's a lot of conversation. I think it goes back to that rubric, really sitting down at that, grading your quality maturity right now and say, this is where we're at right now, and personally ask them. I was like, if you want to move faster with quality built in, you have to look at, this is where we're at, and we need to set a goal of like, how do we get to everything is a 2 or a 3, right? having those conversations, bringing data to them and saying, this is where we're at and this is where I would like us to get there. And for us to get there, I feel like some of the things I presented today gives you a few extra tools in your tool belt, but it's not a perfect, scenario. Everybody's scenario is going to be different. I think if you take that rubric and you take some of those roles and stuff, it's going to be a great step forward. But I think the next is finding the right people in your team to allow you to really achieve that. A lot of things I've done in my career is not me. I give all my credit to my team, the development teams, the people that buy into the things I've been preaching. I think you have to be forceful. I don't have no problem speaking my mind, and I think that's also another thing is you got to have a really strong personality to really try to push forward and don't take no's and no all the time, or just they tell you no and then you go prove them wrong.
I think that we are down to our last question, and hopefully I saved the best for last. I really hope so. So here goes. With this rubric and pathways, what are the roadblocks, if any, you have ran into, and what did you and your team do to work through them or plan to work through them?
I think if you look at the rubric is understanding the roles you have in place today, and if you're really low on that rubric, is how do I, one, train my existing staff up to get level, move it up, or how do I bring developers into the fold to help me achieve that while I'm training people, or how do I create a budget to hire a few extra people on my team to move that? I think that one's super hard because you do have to transform how your team's makeup looks. They have to be more technical. I'm just going to be transparent here, is you're going to have less like QA analysts on your team, but I think you can train your QA analysts to be kind of that quality engineer and writing some tests. They also give you that picture of the wider perspective, of the user perspective, hold us more accountable. So I think you always have to have diversity with that, your team makeup. I think that's the hardest one, is creating that right diversity of like having someone super technical, if they could do DevOps, Dev, and QA, to down to someone's a specialist to where they're just, a rock star at that, and they can really push the envelope in the sense of asking the right questions. Hey, how are we testing this? I've seen this, that diversity of that team is really hard. And, I've had great success with my team in the past, and I'm building that exact same thing with a team now. Is building that right makeup is really hard. I think the culture thing is if the team really wants to embrace quality and move faster and build it, I think that actually that one's the easiest, is changing the culture. If someone says they want to change a culture and you continue to hit like a wall, that means they really don't want to change. So that is really hard to change. Having developers own more things, that can be challenging. I think it goes back to what I was saying, you need to have quality advocates, especially developers, and they will allow you to achieve those type of things. If you can get a few developers believing in it and proving that they can write tests and improve quality and move faster, sooner or later, everybody else is going to get in line. But I've also seen culture to change culture. The only way to change culture is people to leave the company. It allows you to achieve it because then you can hire people to aligns with your culture. There's so many things in that whole rubric. Everyone's going to have a challenge, a different challenge to it. But take your time with it. Only focus on one or two. Don't try to do everything at once. Like everything I presented here, it was a 5-year journey. I mean, when I was at Gannett, and here in Everfi, I feel like, I'd like to see if I can do that faster. Based on my experience, and then that's a lot of this presentation. I've learned a lot over the period of time, and I think in the last 2 or 3 months we are starting to achieve a lot of things that a lot faster than I was expecting, because I'm laying that foundation. I think that was it.
No, yeah. So I think that we're coming up at the end of the hour. So that's all the time that we have for today. I don't want to run over. Before I let Greg say his goodbyes, I Again, want to thank everyone that joined us for this live session. And of course, thank Greg for this insightful and thought-provoking session. And I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Another reminder that the recording with the slides will be emailed to you by end of day Monday. And I do hope to see you at our next event. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. Have a great day.